we're not going to get anywhere by just blaming people, but it's more about ensuring that the leadership have the right mindset. We find that organizations that have done well is when they invest in their own people, they invest in securing the human, and then look at improving the other processes along with it, because we know security is not just about, technology, but people, process, and technology.
Hello and welcome to Identity Today, your go-to for what's what in all things security, identity and biometric tech. I'm your host, Blair Crawford. Today in the show I'm going to be joined by Shamane Tan. She's a TEDx speaker, she's the Chief Growth Officer at Privasec and DroneSec, and she's an all-round knowledge fountain when it comes to what's going on in the cybersecurity industry. On the show, we talk about the ways that critical infrastructure facilities can be exploited by really simple means, and some of the things you have to look out for when it comes to actually auditing and then protecting your assets. I hope you enjoyed the conversation.
I think it might be worthwhile to take 1 minute to discuss security.
Hi Shamane, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on here.
Hi Blair, nice to be here as well. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited about this episode. You've set it up as being about incognito war stories, and I'm not entirely sure what that entails, but that's certainly something that I'm excited to hear more about. But I think before we do that, it would be great to get an intro to a little bit about you to set the scene.
Yeah, sure. As we all know, cybersecurity has become a necessary investment these days for businesses, and it's definitely a required collaboration in our industry, right? So my role as Privasec's Chief Growth Officer is to identify these challenges encountered by different CISOs or security leaders in organizations, and I'll help them breach any knowledge or skill gaps together with my team of risk assessors and ethical hackers. Because at the end of the day, it's really about just helping businesses strengthen their position for growth with cyber resilience. But I think many of you would probably know me more for being the founder of Cyber Risk Meetups. And it's really just a community that I've built over the years to allow international leaders to come together and exchange knowledge and experience.
So, through your work, you must hear about all sorts of inventive ways to breach organizations. We'd love to hear a bit about, your experience and what you've seen through the work that you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. There's a lot of stories, so I would just have to pick one. Maybe before I go on the story, let me rewind a bit and, start with who Privasec is and how I came about to be able to share this story with you guys. So Privasec is one of the fastest growing cybersecurity company in Southeast Asia and Australia. So we specialize in governance, risk, and compliance. But the interesting bit is also we have a RAID team that does ethical hacking for businesses. So some of the projects that the RAID team has been involved in would include social engineering their way into boardrooms, gaining access to classified information, or even cloning access cards, Wi-Fi hacking, and really being put on objectives, right, to locate top secret data center operations. So today I can share with you a real life war story from one of our RAID team engagement, and we call it the incognito war stories.
I can't wait to hear about that. What's happened?
Yes, sure. So in one of our engagements with the critical infrastructure sector, we were given 2 objectives. So the first is to find and access the control rooms. They didn't tell us, which of the 5 sites this control room was located in. And the other objective is to see if we were able to connect to their SCADA network to prove the possibility of a major disruption. So I'll walk you through how we went about it. The team actually spent quite a bit of time initially to do open source intelligence gathering and surveillance of the site. We actually used drones as well to perform reconnaissance of the buildings, and this helped us gain a quicker mapping of the perimeter and the internal layout of the buildings. We also looked at, identifying the shift and roster patterns of the employees, and then we find the right time to go about to just really, action this. And what we did was we broke into the site using a shove-it tool that you use to shove between the door and the door frame. And before the whole engagement, we had to buy uniforms as well to look the part. So that includes, proper wear, the safety glasses and all. And the funny thing is, we could actually have saved some money because in the very first room that we got in, we found a whole box of brand new helmets and uniforms just sitting there. So we could have easily just gotten the costume, the uniform from the room, right? It was, easily accessible. Now, what happened is that we have about 2 to 3 of us on the day itself. One of us had a checklist board. He pretended to do an audit. And you'll be surprised to find that most people would rather avoid the auditors. So we didn't really get much people challenging us. In fact, they just thought it was part of the routine. And do you know how we found the control room?
You asked someone?
Yeah.
Oh no.
We simply just asked the staff to show us, because the moment we said we were doing an audit, we were left unchallenged, and people actually asked us, okay, what do you want to see? Right. So along the way, we managed to connect to a network port and scan the network for evidence of critical systems. Obviously, this is we want it to be non-invasive because we want to prevent real disruption to the SCADA environment itself. And what happened is along the way, we also bumped into a janitor on our way out. And we instructed this janitor to provide his access card for inspection. And then we created our own copy of it.
You cloned the access card?
Yes, that's right.
In front of him?
Actually, yes, with the laptop. And also he thought we were auditing his card, but we were cloning it. So that gave us a lot of access. So now at this stage,
okay.
I know it sounds a bit, but it's important. I need to explain, right? That in every engagement.
At this point, it sounds like one of these movies you would watch and you would say, that would never happen.
Yeah, I know. It sounds like a James Bond. I mean, we always say the Red Team, it's like a James Bond movie, but, pretty much without the guns and the cars. Yeah.
So what happened next?
Yes. In every engagement, we need to have a get out of jail card, because these engagements are very dangerous, right? And if we were questioned, we need to have the right documentation to show that we've been authorized to do these red teaming activities and we are not doing this illegally. So what happened next was actually quite interesting. The security guard did find us as we were just about to leave the site. So he actually stopped us because he thought maybe something was a bit amiss. And what we did was we explained to him that we were there to conduct an audit of the doors. Now, this was our chance to, by right, we should just show him the get out of jail card, which is all the authorization letter. But instead, we actually tested the boundaries. We gave him a story. We said we were auditing the doors. We provided a fake letter of authorization. And we wanted to see how he would respond. Right. Unfortunately, he didn't verify the letter. He read it. And he didn't make any calls to confirm. He just sees like the name there, the numbers there, the signatures. And then what happened next was really interesting. He proceeded to take us around, gave us a tour of the whole place because he was really eager to help facilitate the repairs and security enhancements. So he said, I've been talking to the management for so long and asking them to get all these things fixed. So I'm so glad that you guys are here. And then he proceeded to show us all the security gaps of the environment.
Poor guy.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a great example of a well-intentioned staff member, but he misunderstood policies, or he was not feeling empowered enough maybe to appropriately challenge strangers. And this is a whole example like where in cases like that, it's not about pointing fingers or blaming people, because it's really important to know that at the end of the day, we need to secure the human element itself. We need to continuously raise awareness, and we have to ensure that we have the right processes that are being enforced.
So the gap here for this particular organization was it a training issue and an awareness issue, I suppose, plus process? Or was it a combination of everything?
That's a good question. So yes, it is, because we find that different scenarios play out differently for different organizations. And, it depends on, sometimes even the most secure, aware person would also make the same mistakes, right? Because it could depend on maybe what's going on with him personally at that point in time. Maybe he's feeling down, feeling worried, and they're not being aware or being alert enough to pick up things that are not the right behaviors. So at the end of the day, I would say that yes, there is a delicate balance in learning how to communicate as well, all these vulnerability findings to business leaders without them feeling like it's a strike against the way they operate. But as you mentioned, really, it's a learning process for the benefit of the whole organization.
That seems so easy, though. I mean, even the access control failings and being able to, for example, jam a door open without a door open alarm going off. Some of these things are so easy to avoid. So why is it that that still exists within the culture and within the businesses that we have in our industries? What do you think is stopping people from fixing really simple to fix problems?
Yeah, you've raised a really, really good point, and it's the same sentiments as people in our industry, right? In the cybersecurity industry, you see everyone talking about risk these days, and it seems so common sense in our world. But you'll find that in the other world, it's what seems common sense is not really common sense. So you also find that in surprisingly big enterprises or big organizations that are dealing with pretty much, if you look at a SCADA environment, right, it's really life or death, right? Anything can happen, and you're talking about people's life being lost if there's any mistakes that are being made. And at the same time, you'll find that operational technology and information technology, they don't really talk to each other. So that's a big gap at the moment in our industry. We are seeing that as more people are being made aware of this, there have been improvement done, but it's just traditionally how the sector has been, over the years. They haven't been talking to each other, which is why something so basic like that would still be happening, right, in companies.
Yeah, convergence of that IT and OT environment is one of the hottest topics right now.
Yes.
And it's one of the most important things to have that perspective, that security and risk lens, should I say, across every aspect of an operation. Everybody's talking about it right now, and they're looking for guidance to be able to actually achieve it in their businesses.
Yes.
A question I have, though, we've talked about, so say there had been a malicious attack. You guys weren't authorized to do that, and you had to go in and you had done something to damage that organization. The Mayday button has been pressed. What do organizations do after Mayday? After that breach has occurred, what should they do?
Okay, so just to clarify, it wouldn't be us causing the Mayday because we have never done that.
No, of course not. I mean, if you were a bad person and you weren't there just to test the vulnerabilities. So if a real malicious actor had got in with the same scenario, what does the organization do afterwards?
So that is very key because, there's so much focus these days about like preventive measures, how to avoid crisis. But the key thing also that we need to talk about more is what happens, right, when a crisis do happen. So, we talk about Mayday, but the day after Mayday is very interesting. So I would say that COVID in particularly has really accelerated like digital transformation as well as our cyber risk challenges. At a global scale, right? So what I've seen in some of the mega C-suite and blackout series show that I run with different CISO leaders is when they share stories of these breaches, but more importantly, what do these leaders do after a breach? And in these stories, it really shows how essential it is to always have a business continuity plan. There's a famous military saying that you don't exchange business cards during a crisis, right? So one should be planning ahead of time so that people knows what needs to be done and the different players who should be taking ownership of their different roles. So what we have seen is that the mindset of a lot of companies, they tend to be more inclined to avoid bad press. So they either want to cover up as quickly as possible or get their business running back up as soon as possible. But I find that the leaders who respond really well are those who have the mindset that it's important to have security first before speed. And then balance that with a swiftness of working with the law enforcement, providing logs to forensic teams, but also maintaining a clear communication with the public. You need to have a message that's transparent, but one that also articulates the necessary steps and actions that the company has taken so that this does not repeat again. And you give the assurance to your customers that the data was not compromised beyond the criminal.
So the security event affects the whole organization. So that business continuity plan, we're talking about communications with the public, as you said. You're going to have the internal communication to your stakeholders and the functional areas of your business that provide services to market. But how do you actually go about, from your experience, putting a plan together that the whole organization can respond to when that Mayday event occurs?
Yeah, that is a deep question, because it's about really understanding the organizational culture. What is the current culture? What works internally? How are they doing things right now? Their process. And then before you come up with a plan, you also need to know who are the right stakeholders, who are the right people in the leadership team that should be taking ownership. So that's why it's important to have an exercise beforehand where you bring in all the right stakeholders into the room to map out actually what's their response going to be if something does happen. So we find that like role playing or gamification of such incident response plans actually is really helpful to companies, because sometimes it's in your head, you think that you're going to be doing this, but when it actually happens, you'll find that in a crisis, everyone is really stressed out. It's a high pressure situation, and it helps when you have something really clear about a step-by-step of what needs to be done. So that is actually quite important. And we've found in some of the exercises there were some interesting highlights where, this stakeholder thought another person was supposed to be doing this, but then that person was on maternity leave, and then that's where the chain stops there. Nobody else knew what they were supposed to be doing. So it's things like that. You need to have different scenarios so you know how to respond accordingly.
So if we look back for a second and we consider all of these vulnerabilities which you guys have exposed with your red team, what are the most important things that an organization can do to immediately start remediating their vulnerabilities?
Yeah, no, that's a good question as well. So what's important to note also, because a red team engagement can be really exciting, adrenaline is pumping. There are a lot of findings. It does review a lot of loopholes, maybe in the way the company is doing things or processes or things or gaps that they need to start to breach, right? But in cases like that, we have to be very mindful that it can be a political sort of environment. We have to be very delicate in how we communicate these findings to the leadership, because as mentioned earlier, it's not about pointing fingers, and we're not going to get anywhere by just blaming people, but it's more about ensuring that the leadership have the right mindset, that they know that this is just an opportunity for them to become better, tighten up their gaps, and look at perhaps maybe they need to do more training, do more awareness, improve their culture, create a culture that's more cohesive, that encourage transparency as well in people being able to own up to whether it's mistakes or even being unafraid to challenge things when they are finding things that are not right, or if they are seeing suspicious behaviors or, things like that. Because at the end of the day, it's about working together. So you really need to work well together to mobilize everyone, because your people would be your first line defenders. So at the end of the day, I would say really, we find that organizations that have done well is when they invest also in their own people. They invest in securing the human, and then look at improving the other processes along with it, because we know security is not just about, technology, but people, process, and technology.
That's all we have time for this week on Identity Today with me, Blair Crawford. I would like to say a big thank you to our guest, Shamane Tan, as well as a big thank you to our listeners. Special shout out, of course, to our podcast producer, Dan McHugh, for all the work he does on the podcast. Never miss an episode by subscribing on iTunes or Spotify or your favourite podcast app. If you want to know more about our work at Daltrey, please visit www.daltrey.com. If you have any press inquiries, a listener question, or want to be a guest on the show, email us at hello@daltrey.com or reach out on our Twitter. The handle is @DaltreyID. Until next time.